All right, joining us now. It's been a while since I've talked to her. We've a lot's happened since the last time we've talked. She was on the podcast a couple of years ago in March of 2022, and then ironically we met in person two months after that in the Orlando Regional
We
that
did.
year. And then life changes and stuff, and I'm thinking, well, maybe she's mad at me what happened in the Orlando region. But no, instead she became a mom, and she's got a lot going on her podcast. It continues to explode, which is called, of course, When the Cleats Come Off. You can check that out on wherever your favorite podcast is. She's had some great guests recently, which we'll discuss as well. She does lessons. She's a former Purdue Boilermaker great, played in the pros. I speak of Ashley Burkhart, back with us here on In the Circle and D1 Softball. I'm just glad we're still friends, as it turns out. It turns out you've been busy. That's why you have not been on.
That's it. That's the only thing. Being a mom, it's like everything's changed for the better, I will say. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm very bad at texting now. I'm very bad getting back to people fast. But no, I'm honored to be back on. What you're doing is great.
I do want to actually, start with that. How has being a mom changed you? Because you do a lot of stuff. You're doing lessons. You give lessons, which people can check out. We'll tell you more about that later. But you're doing a podcast, and and people that might think, oh, it's a podcast. What's the big deal? I mean, there's about booking a guest. It's about editing shows and things like you're doing all of that stuff. So how has the
Sure.
mom changed you from that standpoint?
Well, I will say I'm motivated in new ways now. I had a podcast and it was at first dedicated to parents and helping their athlete kind of navigate the game. And because, I have parents who they had three D1 athletes and our experiences, our experience, and there's a lot of people who ask questions about it. And now there's like this new element of the podcast where it's like, hey, parents, I understand you a little bit more. Like, I get why you may be harder on your athlete, right? I get why you want to just swoop in and help them right away with anything going on. Because I do the same thing with now my 1-year-old. It's like, if he falls on his bum, like I'm upset about it, but I have to like help him learn that that's just part of the process. And so I think just that little element of the podcast is kind of new and I enjoy it a lot. I understand parents way more now. But yeah, I think I'm just more motivated now because it sounds kind of funny, but I want to build something that, one day Barrett or any other future kids that I might have, like they could be proud of their mom and be like, yeah, she works her tail off. She loves us so much. She's the greatest mom, but also she gives to her people and she serves them well. And I think that's like a new motivation for me that I like.
What you've expanded your podcast since we last talked. We talked in depth about why you decided to come do a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
which I will have you answer as well. Why? Tell me about not only why you wanted to do the podcast, but you've expanded it from a technology standpoint, equipment standpoint. Like you're posting clips on all those social media. What kind of it helped enhance all that?
Last time we talked, I think we were all the way in season one, and now we're 200 episodes in almost. And so there's a lot that has happened. I've had some really cool guests, like past Olympians, future Olympians, Hall of Fame coaches, just getting their perspective and insight on like what they, wish upon, what would they tell their earlier coaching self or what are things that they're doing in their practices or with their teams that are helping them elevate and, be premier teams. I just use it as a way for coaches or parents or players to kind of just be seen and also be motivated by, these are the best of the best and this is what they do. And, we always learn from the people who are a couple steps ahead of us. So if I can get guests on the show that can, share that piece, then I'm doing my job. And that's kind of the dream. And I do a lot of solo episodes too, where I share a bit of my journey or my story. Like today, I have a controversial episode out about, how to know if you might be a helicopter parent because I think they're everywhere, and honestly, I think every parent is a helicopter parent in some way, but in order to, have just the best, how do you describe it, experience for your athlete to help her achieve her goals without having to hover, I think that's kind of the key. So yeah, that one's probably going to ruffle some feathers, but I'm here for it.
Well, that's the thing about your podcast is not only you'll have guests on, to talk about the sport. Maybe, like you had Aubrey Monroe on recently to talk about the Olympics decision to move the softball Olympics to Oklahoma City. I thought that was a fascinating episode because it was pretty raw and pretty honest takes there. But you also will do episodes on not just lessons, but there's a clip there I think I saw where you talked about how if you asked a player, a hitter, or a question, and the parent answered it, that was a big red flag to you. Things.
Mhm.
How do you decide? Hey, I want to tackle this topic on this particular episode versus I want to have this guest. Because some people, like, for example, we're very heavy here on guests. But I've noticed you like to just go beyond just having a guest. You like to particularly pick out maybe certain things that you noticed in teaching lessons.
Yeah, I try to stay relevant. And this is why I plan to do lessons until I'm 80, 85 years old, because there's always new things that I'm learning from each and every lesson, from the player, also the parent, and the athlete themselves are also elevating or they're changing, like the evolution of the game. You've seen it, like you've been around it long enough to where it's changing a little bit. But I just want to stay relevant, with what's going on. So when we had Aubrey on, when they made the announcement that Olympic softball will be in OKC in 2028. Like that was a no-brainer. I needed an Olympian to come on and share their take. And I saw on Twitter, she was getting beaten up on Twitter from people about her opinion. And I didn't bring her on for controversy. I brought her on because her take is her take. And a lot of us who are not Olympians are going to have probably different ones. And I just like to get other people's perspective on the game on the podcast as often as possible. And also keep things very relevant because, like I said, the game's evolving and it's good to be on top of it.
Well, I think it sounds like you learned that a lot of people have selective hearing sometimes during interviews. But it happens. It happens a lot from that standpoint. Let's talk about. I want to actually bring back to 2020. I joked about, we haven't spoken to 2020. We've actually talked a lot. The reason I bring up the 2022 regionals, we literally met in person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think either one of us thought or even imagined that we were standing on what would turn out to be a pretty historic regional. UCF ended up winning the regional over Michigan. That turned out to be Carol Hutchins' last game as Michigan head coach. You had a unique perspective because you were there because of your sister who's playing, and I'll never forget this, seeing your sister in the podium next to Hutch in what turned out to be Hutch's last podium post-game presser.
Yeah.
Have you had time to reflect on that? Like the fact where you were witnessing in person a couple of years ago? Because on the one hand, you're a sister being supportive there, but you're also a softball person. Like you're watching history before your eyes here.
Yeah, I think I get goosebumps when you share that because it's funny. It feels like that was so long ago, but it really wasn't. And it was instrumental. I think even just the fact that Hutch took on my sister, like she said it out loud to her when she recruited her. Hey, I don't normally take kids from the portal, and it was, just that really cool year just in general. And just Hutch kind of brought us on. Like, I know I played at Purdue, which is another rival Big Ten school, but she acted as if I was a Michigan alum, like she just welcomed us with open arms. So I think just the entire season was just really cool for our family. And, to see her have had her legacy and played against her, in the Big Ten, and now my sister's playing for her, it was so cool. And never once did I think, oh, it's Michigan, right? Like when I was playing at Purdue, it's like, oh, Michigan's so good. Like we have to figure out a way to beat them. But that whole year, it was just like, no, like this is Michigan. And my sister gets to play for the most premier coach, from a record standpoint too, just in the nation. And it's just so cool that my sister got that experience and how cool that it could be her last year. It's kind of just like one of those pinch me moments, I guess.
Did you all have any idea that that could possibly be Hutch's last weekend? Because I remember, no, that's fascinating. So were you all like blindsided when she decided to retire out of the blue in August?
No, I mean, I guess like there were signs, like there were some of the athletes were like, yeah, Hutch kind of seems a little different, but there was nobody was like, this is going to be it, but I'm sure she had a plan. I'm sure she had an exit strategy that nobody else knew about. But no, I mean, her goal was to win that season. And like you would have never seen a sign that she was going to retire. She was like, nope, this is my team. We're going to figure out a way to win. And sadly, they did lose that regional, but they fought to the very end, and so did Hutch.
Yeah, I mean that was a wild regional. First time ever or UCF hosted a regional. It was hot. It was a lot of weather. The cover there, but I think we had an 11-inning game too in the middle of all that. It was kind of everything.
That was terrible.
It
I
was
felt like a rotisserie chicken in the stands, just
yeah,
bacon.
yeah. Welcome to Orlando, Florida. A little different than the Midwest, but it was so historic. And Hutch being emotional, I thought for a second, wow, is she thinking of retire? But then she kept going, and then, but I mean, that was kind of a cool historic moment in softball that will, like, your sister will always know that she played in the last game of Hutch and sat next to her. Like that's, I hope she took a photo of that. I don't know if she did. She probably has a photo of Hutch, but
I hope so.
It's a cool
I haven't
moment.
seen one, but
we gotta get that fixed.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something somewhere.
Let me ask you a little bit about the landscape of softball, because you have Big Ten blood. You played at Purdue. You live in the Midwest. How strange is it going to be to cover the Big Ten, to watch it and follow it this year with the new members, with members from the West Coast and the Washington, UCLA, and Oregon, adding to the Big Ten tournament, Big Ten conference? What's this going to be like for somebody that grew up in this conference and has followed it?
It's going to be weird. I mean, I think the craziest thing, so from my perspective, when I was playing at Purdue, we didn't play home games until late March because we couldn't. It was too cold, right? And now we're bringing on teams and schools and universities that, they play year round outside. Like I'm just thinking UCLA right now. Like they're playing all year round outside, and we're stuck inside, even in season, the majority of season. So it's mind-boggling to see, what's going to happen, especially like our entire preseason was traveling to states that could play outside, right? It'll obviously stay that way for Purdue, or I think, but like once it starts getting warmer, like those schools that are, they're seeing 70, 80-degree weather in March, like they're going to have to come to us, and it might be 40s. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to just the weather, and because we're used to traveling to hot states. It'll be interesting to see that piece, especially pitchers that are having to pitch when they can't really feel their hands. Like that's just something that we do and we have to figure out. But that'll be interesting. I think travel will be wild. Like in order for the NCAA to give athletes a day off, they cannot be traveling on that day off. So I think for the student athletes perspective, like that travel is going to be kind of brutal, I think, truly. If you're playing Big Ten and you're flying and, it takes an entire day to get somewhere and you're basically only there for 3 days and then go home. Like it's going to be interesting. It's going to be hard for athletes. And I'm sure, and I hope that they keep the student athletes in mind in regards to travel and how to figure that out. Because if they're going to play their best, they can't be, dead tired. I mean, they probably will be at times, but it'll be wild to kind of see what the travel does to the athletes. But I hope they're taken care of.
Well, and from a time zone difference too, like
Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be
totally.
unique there. Do you think, as a player, is that something you block out? Is that something you notice right away? Like, I mean, do you think that will impact recruiting from a standpoint? Will some player? Because I've had some people wonder, like, will maybe some of the West Coast teams suffer from a recruiting standpoint because their parents can't go to the Midwest, right? And hypothetically to a West Lafayette to watch their kid play. If you live in California, you have to go from afar, whereas it's not as regional friendly. What do you think of those dominoes and the impacts in those sections there?
Potentially, of course, that does matter. I mean, COVID, I think, changed a lot of us. Like we all kind of became a little bit more homebound, I luckily played 2 hours from my home, so my parents could go to a lot of my games. That's not why. That was obviously a factor. My two sisters just decided to get out of Dodge. They went all the way across the country on the East Coast, but I think that does play a factor with recruiting because a lot of people, they want to be close to home. They want their parents to be around. I think from a dominant standpoint, I think it can definitely grow the Big Ten in general, like because obviously we're picking up schools they have great traditions, great history. So I think the Big Ten will expand in regards to level of play. I think it's automatic that the Big Ten will grow. in that regard. But yeah, recruiting wise, maybe. I think people still want to go to schools though to be able to not just play in a certain conference. I think just the dominance of the team and the leaders on the team. And I think that will probably stay the same. You know, I could be wrong, but this is just me shooting out of left field here. But I think it may come into play, but I think it's kind of cool though that those schools do get to see what the Big Ten has to offer though, from the past Big Ten. Because Purdue built a $13 million stadium, and when people stand in it, they're like, whoa, we had no idea this existed. And now these other schools actually get to see that. So that's also exciting.
Yeah, some people in the Big Ten have told me, hey, look, everybody's going to focus on the questions and the travel and everything. What people are, I was kind of caught off guard with this comment, but I kind of experienced this covering the Big 12 in person this year, doing UCF games, and there's some new experiences that some of these student athletes will get to experience that you haven't. Like there will be players that'll be going to Los Angeles to play UCLA. Yes, lengthy trip, but hey, it's LA. Nobody's, there's probably been players that have been to LA. I know this year UCF, for example, I'll give you an example from them. They got to host Oklahoma and Texas in their last year in the Big 12. Oklahoma and Texas will get to experience, those players are going to get different new experiences. Is that something that maybe, we is a positive, or do you still think that there's more concerns than maybe some of the positives that realignment will bring?
Yeah, I think it's exciting from a player standpoint. If you get to go on these new adventures and see these different cities and try different things, I think it's awesome. Like I played at UCLA my senior year, and that was one of my favorite tournaments, not just because I did well, but like it was cool to be in LA and play softball, and to get that experience. It's like you kind of sign up for college ball to see things you've never seen before. So I think it'll be kind of neat to see, I'm just thinking UCLA, I guess they're just top of mind, but like they'll be playing at Nebraska and there's a lot of corn there. Maybe they've never seen that. Like
Right.
That's kind of just, it's unique. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it happens, but kind of awesome at the same time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting too if UCLA, Oregon, Washington raise the level of the Big Ten in softball.
I think they will. I think they will. Yeah. I mean, when we're playing against the best constantly, that's only going to grow us, right? So, I mean, they've made great postseason runs. I think for the Big Ten, it's going to be a good test for those schools that maybe were middle of the barrel in the Big Ten to be tested often. I think it'll grow us all.
When you're giving out lessons, what's the most common question you get asked from a youngster? Either what's going on in the college game, it could be mechanics. What's the most popular question you get asked constantly?
What's the difference maker, from the average to the best? I think everybody wants that edge to separate themselves. So a common question would be just, how do I get to that next level and how do I stay there? I think a lot of people are learning what it takes, but to do what it takes to be the best are totally different things. So I think if an athlete ever confronts me and asks me like, hey, how do I find that next edge? It's like, okay, you're doing all the things right. Keep doing those things, but here's the next level. It's going to require a different type of, kind of identity as an athlete, as a hitter. So, and that piece is typically the mental piece. Strength wise, yes, we're always going to be building that. We always need to be working on that. But in order to, have all odds against you and still be able to believe in yourself, that's the key factor.
You mentioned one of the reasons you did this podcast and you do the lessons that you do is because you didn't have that when you were growing up and playing, and that was kind of what it has inspired you. Now that you've done it for a while, what part of you wonders, man, if I would have had this, I would have been better at blank as a player? Is there a specific area as a player that you think if you would have had, hey, I've been able to listen to a podcast, like yours, or, see these lessons, hitting lessons that like you're giving. Like if Ashley Burkhart, the player, was taking lessons from Ashley Burkhart, the person that's giving out lessons, what would be different about Ashley Burkhart?
I would say probably the mental piece, only because when I was a senior in college is when I actually like really learned what sports psychology was. And through the podcast, I've interviewed a lot of sports psychologists, mental performance coaches, like Hannah Huseman's come on and she's talked about how she worked with MLB players constantly. And like to understand that the MLB players and the college athlete and even the youth athlete, they have very similar issues and problems. And the fact that there are times where even MLB players doubt themselves. I wish I would have known that, because I thought those people were always just confident. But that mental piece of, how to be your best when your best is needed. I think that's the side of podcasting that I enjoy bringing to the world a lot, because my younger self needed that the most. Because physically it was, my parents and my dad, especially, like, they created a system to help me and my sisters, like, be great at whatever we wanted to be great at, physically. But I think that mental piece and learning how to navigate stress, learning how to be anxious, but use that as fuel, or, get rid of failures faster. Like, I think if I would have been able to get rid of failures faster as a kid, I would have been way better than I ended up being physically on the field in my career.
It's always that mental game, right? Like especially when you play at a sport that you're going to fail more than succeed. It's a game of failing. You probably wish you had that. That's a great point. Mental knowledge there. And it's been interesting. You've had many guests as you've referenced there from that standpoint. I think that's why you and I get along, because I think you and I like to give different perspectives when we do a podcast. We don't just do the traditional run-of-the-mill, hey, we're going to talk about this week in the news in softball. I think we like to talk about a lot of different ranges into the game, and you've done that with a lot of your guests. And Aubrey Monroe, obviously the most recent one that you mentioned, went viral. I'm curious. I'm shocked. Aubrey Monroe has strong opinions. Who would have known?
I know.
I have had her on the pod. I've known her for a while. Actually, I ran into her during this year. She's definitely very strong opinion. That's what she should be. I'm curious, what was your reaction when you heard that the Olympics committee was decided that they were moving softball to Oklahoma City for 2028 LA Olympics? What was your reaction?
Initial reaction was, okay, I guess that makes sense. But then I started thinking, and I was like, this feels like the easy option for the Olympics. Like, hey, they've already figured it out. Let's just put it there. I kind of felt like the bottom of the barrel, to be honest, after I really reflected on it. And then I started seeing Aubrey Monroe's tweets and Sarah Gronewagen's tweets and all of these Olympians from all different countries. That's what really stood out to me. All different countries were sharing opinions similar to mine on Twitter. So then I started binging, and I knew I wasn't the only one who thought that.
Yeah, I do remember that, and I was fortunate. I got to text some of my friends that are the Olympians, and it's a conflicted topic, because on the one hand, you're getting the best facilities that you can imagine as a softball player. But on the other hand, you're like way away from the Olympics. So what's that's the trade-off. And, we could talk about, well, should they have built a facility in LA and California? But then there's finances that come with that, which is a whole complicated deal. But I don't know if there was one clear answer, but I felt like the Olympians should have their voice heard, because they're the ones that experienced it. But it was fascinating in talking to a good number of them. There's a bit of a conflict there of mixed emotions about it, because it's not like you're doing something, like to harm them in a weird way. You're trying to help them, but hey, we got the best facilities. It's the best softball facility probably in the country. But yet you don't get to feel like you're going to be an Olympian, because you're, part of the thrill is to be, hey, you're around these other great athletes and be at the villages. And in softball in particular, they didn't get to experience that in Tokyo because there was so much restriction. So I could see where Aubrey was coming from when I was like listening to you guys talking about it.
She brought so many insights to that conversation that I'm so glad she did. I also liked how at the very beginning, she kind of talked about why softball isn't always in the Olympics, because that's a common question I get. Like, softball will be in Paris, right? And I'm like, no, we won't be in Paris. And there's all these reasons why. But no, her take on 2028 was so good. And I tried my best to make sure it wasn't a rant session, because yes, I do believe that the athletes that have opinions should be able to share their opinions, right? And I wanted it to be more of, look at her point of view. Like you mentioned, 2020, they were getting text messages from Lisa Fernandez and all these other past Olympians, Jenny Finch, like, hey, this is what the Olympics is like. right? And then 2020 happens and they don't get that experience. They were supposed to have, a full 30,000 full stadium and their parents got to go, and then COVID happened. So then they reduced it to 10,000 people and their parents actually couldn't go now because they couldn't travel. And then 2 weeks before they played, they were told no fans. And also everyone's wearing masks. You can't go support other sports. So everything that they were learning from past Olympians, they basically didn't get, sadly. Now, I know they know this as well. Their job is to go and fight for a gold medal, right? Like that is what they're supposed to go and do. And like that was obviously top priority for them. But if you're going to sign up to be an athlete, I dreamt to be an Olympian. Um, you think you're kind of signing up for the whole deal. And so when they didn't get the full deal, they took it personally when now these hopeful 2028 Olympians, they're not going to get that full deal either. So that's why a lot of them were upset about it. And there were so many other things that she shared, but it was really, really insightful to get that take.
And Aubrey's bright. She knows what she's doing, talking, and it was fascinating to listen to that and all the different points and counterpoints, because I was surprised, because one of the common questions I asked a lot of the Olympians was, so would you rather play like at Dodger Stadium, for example, if they could, share that with baseball like you've had to do in other places? Some said, yeah, to just experience.
Who wouldn't?
Right. But then others like, no, I'd rather play this. So it's very interesting from that standpoint.
Yeah. Well, when you say Dodger Stadium, I'm thinking, well, first of all, she also mentioned this in the podcast, like MLB is still they don't stop their season for the Olympics. Right. So she also mentioned on the podcast how baseball and softball are paired, they're partnered.
Yes.
So like if you don't have one in without the other, so if they're together and MLB is in the middle of their season and they're not getting days off, the question to the committee is this the best of the best, especially when it comes to baseball players coming? And we've seen their lineups are good, but like you don't have like the big dogs, competing. So it's interesting in that route as well. But Aubrey also had another great take of, they're used to playing on like artificial turf and like just whatever they're putting together internationally. They just hosted, I think it was 2022, or somewhere around there, like Ireland hosted, and it was like not the greatest field. Yeah. But they played international softball there to help grow the sport internationally. So they're used to playing on something that's not just a typical softball field. It doesn't have to be perfect. But yeah, just with how big softball is in California, you would totally get a show out in California. There's no doubt about it that there would be so many fans to come from California. I mean, look at the Team USA rosters. They are majority Californians on these rosters because they've been a powerhouse for so long. And yes, it's changing a little, but I think it's just wild to see that LA, one of the biggest powerhouses in softball, is not going to have softball there for the Olympics.
Yeah, I just had Bubba Nichols on recently. I mean, played at UCLA. That's the thing that was and she played in the Olympics and was on that Olympic team. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of weird that you don't have it in California. But but at the same time, I remember talking to some of the past Olympians like Laura Berg, Dot Richardson, Stacey Newman about a year ago, and I asked them about it. It's like, and I think I asked them on this podcast, where do you think they would host it? And they didn't have an answer. And I wondered, like, ooh, that could be tricky, especially with the requirements they need. So I always pondered, like, ooh, this could be a lot trickier than people think. Like, we just assume because it's in the States, oh, this is easy, we could just pick one of the facilities, but it's no secret that some of the places in California don't have the best softball facilities. They've been called out on. Like UCLA, for example, does not have the best facilities that people might think. So I kind of had a feeling that, this is going to be interesting. Not as simple as people think, but I never imagined they would just move it to Oklahoma City. But it was fascinating when that news came out and how huge of a topic that became on social media.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Oklahoma City, it would be great if we could just move it, right? Like just pick up the stadium and move it. But like, yes, there's so many, everything's landlocked in LA. There's not room for anything new. But I mean, like you said, we had 4 years. What if there was, some sort of minor league stadium that you can just build up, put a ton more seating there. I think just the biggest thing that is frustrating that I've noticed, I first thought about it with Aubrey was, you have these other Olympians that are huge in other sports, right? Like, just imagine if Michael Phelps, drove an hour or like went to a softball game with, let's say, one of his kids, and that he just found that he loves softball now because he brought his kids, right? Or, other fans like LeBron James, like he's bringing his kids to a softball game. Like, just imagine, like, if that happened. That is where the growth of sport happens, is when people who, and we're not trying to leverage their money, right? Like, we know they have rightfully earned every dime that they have, but it's those type of moments where people start investing in sport. So if we wanted our sport to grow from the Olympics, it's one thing to have it, in Oklahoma City, where like the fans will show up. Like, they're going to be incredible in Oklahoma City, but I don't think we're going to get a ton of new fans from it. Like new
Sure.
fans coming to go watch and bring their kids and grow the game. But, you think of the WNBA, like you have the backing of NBA players because they're going to games with their kids and now they want to invest and make it grow. But like, I don't see any baseball players traveling to Oklahoma City with their daughters and going to watch softball.
No, that's a good point. You're not going to get to casual media. Like, I remember the first softball Olympics in '96 when Bob Costas would interview Dot Richardson after they just won the gold medal. You're not going to, you're going to get that kind of coverage from NBC, but you're not going to get it on site in person in a studio or things like that. Or, '04, that great U.S. team, the dream team of softball in '04 in Athens, they got on the Sports Illustrated cover. Like, you wonder if that gets lost a little bit. It's going to be fascinating.
They were all celebrities back then, like celebrities.
You've done over 200 episodes now, you've said. Is that
almost
right?
200. We're just shy of 2.
Ooh, so the milestone's coming soon. Okay. So who was the guest that you had on? And you've obviously played professionally, so you have pretty good Rolodex. But who was the guest that you got where you thought, wow, this is pretty cool that I am talking to this person on my podcast. That's like a big deal. Like, that's a turning point for the pod. Like, for me, in the circle, I'll never forget when Mike Kendrea agreed to come on. This was like 7 years ago when it was early on in our podcast. I'm like, Mike Kendrea wants to come on with us and talk to us? Like, that that was a big confidence booster and a big turning point, I thought, for our podcast moving forward. Who is that for yours?
Am I allowed to have 2?
Sure. Because
one actually led to the other.
Okay. Fair.
So when Sue Enquist came on, I was stoked to have her. I was so excited to have her. I thought it was so funny because she didn't know that it would be video recorded. And that's on me for not sharing. But she had just come off of, like, she literally surfed that morning. And she came straight to interview for this episode. And it was, I think, almost 2 hours long. She spent so much of her valuable time with me. And it was a dream come true. I was so nervous going into it. I was so excited to have her. But it's still one of the most downloaded episodes of all of them.
Sure.
And after we had chatted, I had told her, I was like, it's my dream to get Caitlin Lowe on, because Caitlin Lowe was the athlete for me. Like, when I had a role model in my life, I'm the oldest of 3. So I didn't have an older sibling to look up to. Caitlin was kind of like that older sibling to me without her ever knowing it. So I would watch her like a hawk anytime she was on TV for Arizona or Team USA. I was obsessed with watching her. So she actually got me a hold of Caitlin, Sue did. So it was one of those really cool things where interviewing her was just a dream, because I got to ask her all those questions from little old me that wanted to know about her passions. And then obviously she was coached by Mike Kendrea. So she shared some stories of him and, what she's learned from him, especially like her love of practice. I think that's something that goes unnoticed from coaches, is they don't understand that, like, Mike Kendrea was doing the fundamentals every day. Like, it wasn't just every once in a while, it was every day. And how much he loved practice has bled onto her to loving practice and helping her athletes grow that way, to where, that was just such a fun episode. Like, little Ashley was screaming when I knew she was coming on.
That's pretty fun. How were you able to keep her composure? Were you nervous? Like, you mentioned you were nervous. How do you like that? How was that?
Okay. So here's the interesting thing. I think studies show that nerves and excitement are like the same. You have the same reaction within your body.
Sure.
So, like, I think it was more excitement. Like, I had goosebumps. I was shaking, but I was like excited. So I think it was more excitement than anything for those two interviews.
Yeah, those are always the best when you get ready. Like, I remember I was that day when I got Mendoza on the first time or two. And it was unique because it was during the All-Star break and home run derby and stuff like that. And Mendoza was like my favorite softball player watching.
Mm-hmm.
And I covered her in the pros, but she's not gonna remember that. But it was like, oh, I gotta impress her. And then like I remember getting Kat on the show and having her explain why she came out of retirement. This was right shortly after she came out of retirement and joined the U.S. Team and all that stuff. And she told the story of what got her out of the retirement and things like that. Those are the fun ones where you feel like you've got, oh, this is good stuff here. And I think you and I kind of have a unique challenge. Like, we like to ask questions that nobody else asks. Like with Kat, I've joked with Kat. If you listen to my interviews, Kat, I rarely ask her about her playing days at Texas because everybody else does. I've always talked to her. I've talked to her more about Texas State and her coaching stuff. And I think sometimes some of the guests appreciate that kind of stuff when they're like,
they do.
Right?
They do. They like a little challenge. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who's a guest that you're targeting that you haven't had on yet, but it's somebody who's in your bucket list?
Oh, Jenny Finch.
Oh, that's mine too. That's mine too. We're going to have to fight for it now. All right.
I met her at convention once, and it was like one of those where I was like, do I say something? And I tapped her on the shoulder. I was like, hey, Jenny. And I was like, I would love to have you come on my podcast. And she's like, oh, totally. And I don't know if I have this like internal doubt that like she won't say yes, but I don't even know how to really get a hold of her. So after that conversation, I'm like, crap. Like, do I text Natasha and be like, hey, give me Jenny's number? But I want to do it in like a very professional way. I don't want to just be like, hey, it would be super cool to come on. No, I want her to be excited about it. And typically when I ask guests, and you probably are the same, I try to do it around like big launches that they have. So like if I ask somebody to come on that like Amanda Scarborough, if she has like a big new course coming out, be like, hey, come on and we can talk about your course. Like I want to ask questions that are going to light up my guest, and you probably do the same. But you want to ask questions, obviously, that because you've done your research, but also to make them feel really good about the things that they're doing.
Sure. I mean, I just had Monica Abbott on this past year because she got into broadcasting, which that's a subject I enjoy talking a lot about as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a blast there, and that was cool because I think I was the first person that got her to talk about why are you getting into broadcasting? And what are you intrigued about? And it was cool. So I know what you mean on that. But yeah, Jenny Finch, that's the big one.
I mean, I would love Mike Candrea too. So I will say that one as well.
That one I think you can get. You can get that.
Probably. And Patty Gasso, obviously, but like she's still coaching. So I think, and she's also a big family person. Like I had JT on because he was one of my coaches in college. And so when I got him on, it was huge. But also like, I do understand like Patty's just got a lot going on. So got to be smart about how to get her on.
Fair. All right, that's good. Yeah, I like how your booking minds thinks. I like this. We'll have to share ideas off here. I want to ask you about some of the topics within the game. Mm-hmm. So I remember when we had you on 2 years ago, you talked about how you love slapping because you wanted to make, and I think I'm paraphrasing what you said, but you wanted to make defenses look stupid. That was literally what you said.
I did.
That was the challenge you enjoyed. Is there a part of you that's concerned about the state of slapping in the game today? Because there's more and more teams going with power, explosive offense, big swings, more baseball type coaches coaching now in softball and their philosophy. I know some slappers or players that I've talked to from the past worry that the slap game might be it's slowly not in the game as much as it used to be. Is that something you share, or you think that's overblown?
I think you're right that slapping has taken a little bit of like a downturn, I guess, with excitement around it. And it might be because Natasha and Caitlin, like they were like the faces. Now there are a lot of great slappers still out there. But I do think that, everything's a fad, right? It's like, it'll come back. I look at the bigger picture. I think, yes, right now power is definitely what everybody loves, but like the art of slapping, I don't think will ever just completely go away. I think there will always be an element of love for that, because I actually work with a slapper right now, and she was a righty hitter last year. and she spent all of off season learning how to slap. And she has never had more fun playing the game of softball than as a slapper, because the way her brain works, she likes to find the problem area and go, just like me, like go find like the weakest link on defense, as brutal as that sounds, and go beat her. Like that's how you're going to get on base. And she loves playing that game with herself. And so now she's one of the premier hitters on her team and is very, very good. And I'm just like proud of her for making that move and trusting it and trying it, because her game has never been better since she went to that side. And there's just so much excitement I have around it too. Even though I spent the last 2 years of college and pro ball not slapping, I still think it's a beautiful piece of the game that I don't think will ever go away, or it shouldn't.
I don't think. Yeah, no, I agree. I think the speed game is certainly a big factor there. Is there any part of this sport that you've noticed, either in whatever levels, that you think needs to be addressed? That you think it's got to be called to attention? I don't know if you have necessarily concerned about, but you're like, hey, this is something that we need to certainly talk more about within the game to make the game better.
Well, the big change last year of when there's replay, being able to go back and if anybody's leaving early, even if they're not stealing, like, I think that is just, we got to fix that. Like, that's a new thing, I guess, but man, that irks me. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I was one of those players who left like a hair early, and that was my goal. My goal is to leave. So if here's where she's releasing it, I try to leave around here. Okay. So it's really like, if you're looking with the naked eye on a full windmill, like you don't really see that. Right. But I tried to like leverage that a little bit. And that was when I was stealing, when I wasn't, like, I would always leave at that time. Now, if that rule was applied and I was an athlete, I would have to figure out how to be more on time. But I do think it kind of takes away from the speed of the game. Because if you're just gonna do it just to hopefully get a girl going early, and now you've taken all this time away and momentum away from the game just to like replay it, I think that's absolutely absurd. I think to make it better, sure, if you want to look at it and she was actually stealing, go for it. I mean, that's the risk that you take as a base runner. But if she's not stealing, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? We're trying to like find out where the naked eye isn't seeing. So what are we doing? I don't know. That bugs me.
And the wild thing was they would take away home runs or big plays like that.
That's huge.
Now the rules committee has come out since this offseason, have mentioned they're trying to modify it, because talking to a lot of people there, that was not the intent when they put the rule in. It was really just to see of a player if they left too early trying to steal second, for example. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever imagined coaches challenging whether a runner left early after somebody hit a home run. I don't think anybody ever imagined that. So now I think they're trying to kind of curtail it back, because one of the problems I saw, it dragged the game, it delayed the game.
So much.
And it was funny because you remember this, when the college season started, the big emphasis was, hey, we got a pitch clock for every pitcher. We want to speed the game up. And yet you counter that by all these reviews.
I know. But shout out to the coaches that are like, I guess, doing it, because I mean, they're working by the rules.
Yeah, I don't blame the coaches. Yeah, I don't blame the coaches.
Like, smart coaches are finding loopholes, right? Like, that's what everybody's doing. But I think, that was definitely, hopefully they modify that so the length of the game, like you said, is fixed, because that was ridiculous.
I think that's what we're going to see. I think they're going to still be able to review if you stole a base, but I don't think they're going to be able to review a play if the play was a home run, for example. I think that they're going to try to tuck the kid away. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see as the offseason continues. A couple last things. Transfer portal, NIL. Which of those two topics, because I know that's become a big thing now in the sport. What you didn't have to deal with it, especially the NIL part. When you think of those two things, what comes to your mind? Your sister went through it from the transfer portal standpoint.
Both of my sisters did. Yeah. So where the transfer portal has gone, I think that what I think of is like easy way out of hard, right? Like, I think every athlete that goes to play Division I softball, or any softball really in college, or any sport, it's hard for everyone. Like, it is not easy. And I do believe that the transfer portal should exist for those special occurrences of where this is not working. Like, for student athletes' mental health, especially, right? Like, if it's just not a good environment for this human being, or they need to get out, they should have a way out. But when things like what did they say? There were 300 pitchers in the transfer portal this year, something
Definitely
like
over
that.
200, might be close to 300. Yeah.
Like, I am so like the fact that 30% of people that go into the transfer portal don't get out of it, that kills me. Because if I, my freshman year was so hard, and I know everybody's freshman year is so hard that, like, yes, the easy way out is say, oh, let's go try something else. But no, it's hard everywhere. Like, it's just hard in general. Like, the game is speeding up. Your priorities of academics, which is already super hard, especially depending even where on you go to school, right? Like, you go to Stanford, I'm pretty sure academics are taken a little differently than, other schools, right? So if you are in it, like, it's hard for everybody. But I think I'm so proud of myself now looking back on it for going to Purdue for 4 years and going through going through a coaching change, but sticking with it and, becoming my own, athlete that I wanted to become out of that experience. It was the best 4 years of my life. And I just hate that some athletes are leaving, after one hard season when, think of the comeback that you could have, or think of the transformation that you can bring to your game by just sticking with it. I think it's just sad. There's some kids that are going to be juniors and they've already been to 2 other schools. It's crazy.
But now some are leaving because of NIL. That's become a game changer now, where a
Yeah.
lot of money's
Yeah.
been not just softball. And not this is. I mean, we're doing this because it's a softball podcast, but this is across the board in
Yeah.
college athletics now. It's a game changer. Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there is finances now that, and in softball, the uniqueness about it is some players feel like, hey, I might make more money here during this time than I would in pro ball, for example, which is a whole other topic. But NIL, that's something you didn't have to deal with. I mean, that would have been interesting how you would have handled that if you were playing and NIL money was thrown around there.
Yeah. It's sad because that amateurism kind of goes away. My husband and I, we were on the Purdue's Big Ten like SAC committee. So we represented Purdue at the Big Ten level. And this was already starting to kind of get into the works when we were in it. And, my husband's take on it is way better than my take. Like, he's the pro here. He actually represented the Big Ten on the national level in regards to this stuff. But at first it seemed like a very selfish thing. But like, it's so interesting because I get where a lot of people are coming from. Like, some people have to support their families. They need to be able to find a way to make money aside from their sport, or even just using their sport as that leverage. Like, I think there are definitely good things that could have come from it. But the fact that when it was written up, there were no rules around it, I think that was the issue.
Right.
Because now it's being loopholed in all these different ways. And now the rich are getting richer. And it's very hard to see people make decisions on money rather than finding the place that you can have the best 4 years of your life and enjoy it for what it is and the amateurism of the game. Like, I don't know how I would have dealt with it. Like, as one of like a bigger player in the Big Ten, if I were to be called up by a school that had a lot more money, I would have never gone. And I just think it takes away from the athlete's love for a university and representing the university for what it is, not just because they pay you a lot of money.
Well, part of the issue was the NCAA was so strict, like you couldn't make money. Like, for example, like if you couldn't promote like your own lessons or things
Nope.
like, oh, that'd be against a violation. Or maybe if they would have softened on that and
Sure.
allowed you to promote, because there is the counter argument in talking to athletes about it is like, wait, how is it that the schools and the NCAA, they could take advantage of my image for all my hard work? So there was that. That was it was
Sure.
too extreme on the other way.
I know.
That I think
Yeah.
kind of set this up, didn't it?
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, again, I think athletes should get paid to do camps and lessons and like
Yeah.
do things that they love and are passionate about. I just think there definitely should have been a lot more rules around it from the beginning because it just went wild and crazy.
How much of you think too is parents influencing the kids to like, hey, maybe we should bowl, because how much of parents controlling the player, the kid's decision, when it really should be the kid's decision? How much do you see that as a factor as well?
I see it as a big factor. I think, especially as a coach who tries to give our athletes as much voice as possible, athletes want to please their parents. It's just around the board, it is something that we want to do. Like when we have a really good game and our parents are smiling and they're proud of us, like obviously they're proud of us all the time, but there's nothing like trying to light your parent up and make them happy, right? So that's always going to be something that players care about a lot. So I think if your parents are kind of pushing one thing, whether you're trying to listen to it or not, subconsciously, you're probably going to lean towards that. So parents have a huge pull on their athletes' decision making, no doubt.
Well, and I think you interviewed your dad, right? In an episode. And I thought it was interesting because sometimes the parents could be the worst enemy if they blow up the kid like you're the greatest thing ever. That kind of, that's sometimes that's a negative, in a lot of ways. Sometimes being tougher on the kid, say, no, look, you got to be better, might be better as a parent, right? There's that juggling now. I thought that was interesting when you talked to your dad about that and how you handle, daughters that are playing sports.
He kept us humble.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I was being nice.
Totally. No, shout out to my dad. He did a great job of this. But I remember going to a very elite tryout for a very elite organization that I ended up making the team. I shouldn't have spoiled that. But I went to a tryout. There's 70 people there. And he's like, yeah, I don't think you tried out that great. And I made the team. And so I'm playing with all these other athletes who are either committed to D1 or want to play D1. And it was like, ooh, I made it, and after that tryout, I kind of believe maybe I didn't, I never felt like I was at my best. And I think part of my dad, always telling me there's more, we can get more. It was definitely good for me to just keep wanting to find new levels of how I can get better. But yeah, I mean, I think parents should be humbling their kids. They shouldn't tell them that they're the greatest.
Well, and let the coaches coach. Like the college coach knows what they're doing more times than not. You don't need to be an extra coach. But that's we can get on a whole other.
I was gonna say I could spend a couple hours talking about that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Now you've got things to do. Although I still am kind of perplexed because you told me 2 years ago that as a player you didn't talk. You were not a talker. You did not you were very much more play by example.
I was.
And now you're a podcast host, so you talk a lot. You have to.
I know. I think I told you
where did you get your voice?
Podcast.
Where did you get your voice?
Well, yes, I was the player who I would much rather just show you instead of tell you, right? If I'm told to do something, I'm going to do it as well as I possibly can. But I think it's because my dad humbled me a little bit. He was like, let other people talk about you. You don't talk about you ever. So I probably would have struggled with this whole recruiting on Twitter and all this stuff now. But yeah, I was all about I'm going to show people how great I am. I'm not going to tell them, So when I played, I was a vocal athlete. I'm not just going to say I was silent the whole time. Obviously my junior, senior year, I needed to be a leader. So I did have a voice there. But it truly was, I think it was 2019, I started doing lives on Facebook and just talking about certain topics, honestly, very similar to what my podcast is, but I would, plan an entire episode and I would just talk. And I did it because I followed a coach just for any sort of leadership, a leadership coach. And she was talking about do the thing that needs to be done, but you're terrified to do. And for me, that was just speaking out loud to an audience that's listening or watching. And so I was like, okay, I'm very scared to do this, but let's just try it. And so I think it was for 2 years straight, every Monday I would do a live. And it was very, very rough at the beginning. I'm sure if we go into the archives and look, it was awful. But over time, I've started to be able to express certain things that I'm passionate about on the podcast with a lot more, I guess, I don't want to say authority, but just with a little bit more passion and also knowledge around those things. So that's where it started. I think it was 2018, 2019. I could be wrong. But yeah, that's where it started. And it has taken me all the way here, almost 200 episodes in to when the cleats come off. And there's no turning back now.
Well, I'm happy you did. I'm glad you did. Always enjoy having you on. We always have these lengthy chats because we have a lot of opinions. We'll definitely bring you back on. But in the meantime, tell the audience where they can find you, not just the podcast, but everything you're doing.
Sure. Probably best place is ashleybtraining.com. I have everything about podcast. I have a confidence course on there. Also, I do virtual hitting. That's some of my biggest excitement is being able to work with hitters from all over the country. I even have someone from Hawaii. I'm totally going to brag on her right now. She works so hard. I'm so proud of her. Now, I will say timing wise, because she's 6 hours behind me, is a little tough to figure out. But I want to be able to help hitters, whether they live in a state where maybe they don't have an elite hitting coach that can help them really get to the next level. I just want athletes to have that. So that's where I started the Virtual Hitting Academy. But I obviously got a lot of love for that. But I do have a course coming out soon, and I have not shared it with anyone.
Whoa.
And I wasn't planning on talking about it, but you've kind of got this out of me. Can I share it?
Hey, I mean, it's up to you. You're up. It's fine with us. If you want to give an exclusive here, I like it.
Okay. It's base running.
Oh, that's perfect. I mean, you are the stolen base queen at Purdue.
I do have some records there, but I will say I think this is the most under-practiced, underutilized piece of the game that nobody talks about or does. So some of my favorite, I'm not going to tell you who, but some of
Okay.
my favorite just speedsters, base runners, you can totally guess if you want to, but some of my favorite friends, I can't say favorite friends, but a lot of my friends in the game who love base running, love speed work, they are going to be in on it, and they're going to be teaching elements of their expertise as well in the course. So it's coming very soon, hopefully
Wow.
fall. Yeah.
That's cool. That's pretty sweet. I'm intrigued now who you're going to have on. I'm going to have to keep an eye on you now on this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you shared that. And then, of course, you got your podcast. I think you had Alex Tarocco in your most recent episode I listened to, or?
Alex Tarocco spoke to my Virtual Hitting Academy members. And so I pulled part of that conversation with my athletes and put it on the podcast last week. It was very good.
It's pretty cool. And you got more
Mm-hmm.
coming. More coming. Hey, always a great to catch up with you and have you on. We're definitely going to have you more on, but I've been respectful. You're a mom. That's priority. You're a busy person, but I always love talking to you. Like I said, always enjoy even when we text and, like you booked your sister on the podcast. I always thank you for that as
Oh,
well. You're a
anytime.
good booker. But hey, have a good time. Be safe, and we'll catch up soon as well.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much for having me on again. It's been fun.